I am so excited to have a fellow broadcaster and someone that's done things I can only dream about and talk to people that I can only fantasize about. It's Paul Myers, star and host of the Record Store Day podcast. How are you, Paul?
I'm great. I love this world that we're in. I can communicate with Australia from Berkeley, California. So
Yeah,
hi, and thanks for having me.
no problems at all. Um, how do you decide what's going to make the podcast? Because there's so much happening in vinyl these days, and I know it's not all about vinyl, of course, but how do you decide what's in and what's out? You must be excited to flip through your options.
Well, would you mind if I explained it by explaining what the podcast is? And I think
Let's
that
do
explains it.
that.
Okay,
That was my second question.
so a lot of podcasts out there, and I used to have a radio show a few years ago. It's a long story, and I've always wanted to get back into it. And of course, podcasting was the way in. And I didn't know what I was going to hang. I'm a musician. I am a journalist, and I wanted to hang something that would be broad enough that I could interview a lot of basically music-oriented guests. That was the thing. At the same time, I did some trade writing for the people who do Record Store Day, which is, you know what that is. I think everyone knows that. Basically they're like a merchants association for physical record stores, and they're a great organization, and they've done a lot to promote independent music as well as independent stores and independent promoters, and they're very. I love what they do. Well, they asked me to do this thing, and I just happened to mention to Michael Kurtz that I wanted to do a podcast about music. And he said, well, we wanted to do a podcast. And I said, well, let's do it. Let's do the Record Store Day podcast. And so the only proviso, it seems to be, is we like to promote the idea of having physical sales. And generally sold in stores, because there's a lot of mail order and there's a lot of Bandcamp, which we love. I mean, I order stuff from Bandcamp all the time. And I even subscribe to Apple Music streaming. But I think that what I love to do is buy records, and what we talk about on the show. So what I like to do is get the guests that have records in stores or about to have records in stores, like next week or something, as well as I talk to legacy artists who have made records that we've all loved. So I talked to Elvis Costello. But I also talked to, recently just interviewed Yola, who's one of the most exciting new singers on the scene. I say new, she's been around a few years. But we'll also talk to people who aren't as well known, or I talk to Teenage Fan Club because I love their records from before and they're still making records. So I'll talk to them, and different artists at different levels. And people now are starting to tell me stuff like publicists and stuff are starting to come up and say, can we get something on the show? A lot of times I'm hunting down my heroes and there's a lot of that going on. And so it just worked out really well that we managed to get things like Daniel Lanois. I'm a huge fan of production. I wrote a book about Todd Rundgren. Todd's been on the show a few times, but Daniel Lanois, Tony Visconti, who did David Bowie and T-Rex. And, so for me, it's always fun to have those people. So I hope I answered the question a little bit there. There's more really of an explanation in there.
No, that was fantastic. Can we just linger on Todd Rundgren for a second?
Absolutely.
Being an Aussie, I just know the big hits, which there wasn't, there's not dozens and dozens of them. But, Todd's influence is through every vein of rock and pop. And I can't wait for my copy of that book to arrive. But what's he really like?
Well, that book you're referring to was called A Wizard, a True Star, Todd Rundgren in the Studio, and Jawbone Press in England put that out. Todd Rundgren, as a human, he's a fantastically eclectic person who is interested in a lot of different things. He's a musician first, but he's also a producer and kind of a keen follower of systems. Like he's fascinated with starting out with recording technology, guitar pedals, and then going into the internet. He was one of the first people, when he lived in the Silicon Valley area, he was one of the first people working on software and outreach with musicians. He did some, sponsorship with Apple Music, and he also did a couple of like software programs that he was involved in. And now he's in Hawaii, but he just did a virtual tour when it was impossible to take people out. He's very concerned about the environment, so he's also trying to find ways to reduce his carbon footprint and using the internet before the lockdown. He was interested in doing that. And so he's currently touring in a way that he's spacing out his dates strategically to use minimum amounts of diesel fuel, which I think is really cool. And there's a million things to tell you about him, but the main thing I think is neat about him is he can synthesize anyone else's music. So if Patti Smith or XTC or Hall & Oates or the New York Dolls and Meatloaf would come to him, he'd say, here's how I think you should do it. How do you feel about that? They would do kind of the way he wanted it. And if they wanted it differently, he'd go, okay, I'll find you that. And then there's his own music, which is a whole other thing. He's constantly changing that too. So I think it's never a dull moment with Todd Rundgren, I guess is the way to put it. And he's been very kind to me.
Yeah, he's a real polymath. And genius is a word that's not, it's thrown around sometimes too often.
He's a wizard.
Yeah, he's a really great guy, and I look forward to learning more about him. I just wanted to go back to, you said buying music. It's a big question, Paul, so gird your loins. Do you think the streaming model is going to work with just the hundredths of a cent that's getting chucked at, say, your mid-level performers that want to pay their mortgage and stuff like that, not the hobbyists?
I don't use Spotify. I mean, I do use Apple Music, but I use it for work. I use it mainly for research. But I'm not a fan of the way those people have been paying out artists, and I don't think every musician I know, especially this was very prevalent during the lockdown, which is still going on. And I think it's especially going on in Australia, right?
Yeah, we had the Delta come across from India. Hey, we love India, but that's where it came across.
No, I mean, these things they travel. Just happened. Yeah.
And we had a really, really big result. And then we knew it would get into every other country, and it did. But we've stopped gauging, who's doing best. There's a lot of people passed away, and it's all horrible. So we're trying to concentrate on the solutions, not any negativity.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because it became very obvious after a while that the way the current paradigm is for musicians to make a living, and I know so many musicians at every level. And even the ones you think would make a comfortable living outside of touring, they all need touring. Todd Rundgren tours, Elvis Costello tours. They have money, but they need, to make a living, and they need to be out there. And then there's the people who are jobbing musicians who couldn't do anything to do with their playing. And so the streaming services do not help those people. I mean, for maybe Elvis Costello and those people might make some income from streaming, but the people that I don't want to name names, but people who are not that well known, and they tell me, they had to take other jobs. I mean, and I don't know if the audiences know this. I don't know if the audiences know that being a musician is a job. It's having, and you're good at it, and you should be paid for it. It's a job. It's just like having someone in to paint your house or something like that. Someone makes music for you, you pay them. And that's all they want. They're not trying to get rich or rip you off. They're just trying to make a living. Now, some people are trying to get rich and rip you off, but we know that the marketplace is about taste and culture.
It's not generally the artists, is it?
Yeah, no, it's usually the record company. So the problem is the old model didn't support things that were not either 100% hits or like there's this like on-off switch. It's so I guess binary. So now we're in a situation where it's become very obvious that everyone is ultimately working an Etsy page. Everyone is ultimately just hand making their records. And there are labels that will help them get those distributed, but really it's down to every artist and every person. And not everybody has the same level of expertise at self-marketing or self-promoting, those things. So there needs to be a little bit, and I think people are doing this, but there needs to be a real adjustment into how we understand what the marketplace of culture is. And that's a big topic. And I don't know if we're going to do it today.
No, we're not going to do it today, but I thought I'd throw it out there. I've got a mate at work who's had 2 iTunes Aussie hits, and she's just she's just gone full time at work from part time to full time. I don't think it's because she wants to. So that gives you a bit of an idea about what a streaming hit might bring home bacon wise.
No, I mean, and you have YouTube stars, especially younger artists and newer artists. There are people who are very popular on YouTube, and eventually they monetize their YouTube page or something. But you're not making the money off the music. It's sort of like cinemas selling the popcorn. You get the traffic, and then you figure out how to make money from the traffic, but it's not from the music, which it's a real shame. I mean, I think I know I'm a musician, and when I was a kid, I had a dream. I had a dream that it was going to be that, eventually I would be able to just make records and do all that stuff. Now, in my case, maybe I wasn't good enough, but I know a lot of people who kept on as long as I have, and they've had good years, and you can do this. You can make a living. People raise families being a musician. And I don't know. I just want to make sure that that's still out there. So, and how that dovetails to the Record Store Day podcast is, a lot of these labels that are selling in independent stores, they're also mom and pop labels, and there's artists, getting records into, and record people meet other record people in stores. And it's a kind of a way to return to that sense of accountability, that this person did that and these people are your fans. It's a relationship.
Yes, well, a lot of small record labels reach out to Slice Radio here, and we do our best to support them. But you get a lot of thanks, but it's in the thankless task, money wise, and it's not something that I'd ever think about is opening a small record label. But the people that love it do it well. Is vinyl important, Paul, or is it just a fleeting fancy over the last couple of years?
I think vinyl is as important, and this is a cop-out answer, okay? But I think it's as important as you make it. I think that, there is a whole culture of not wanting to own physical things because you don't want to put clutter in your life. Yeah. At the same time, there's a sense that each of these pieces is valuable to you. So therefore, that's not clutter. Clutter is something that isn't valuable. So if I have my records and my books that I want to keep, those are valuable to me, and that's, I'm holding those things is the word tactile comes up a lot. And I think that having those things in your hand, and also some say the sound is better. The court is out on that one, but I've heard some very well mastered CDs, and I'm not going to throw CDs under the bus just yet. But there is something about putting the needle down, and there is something about watching it go around. And there's a kind of a slowness to it. It's like slow food, like you take the thing out of the 12-inch sleeve and you put it down on the turntable. So I don't know. I mean, I think people like the idea of having something to hold in their hand. And you go to a show, and if you buy the 12-inch album from the artist, sometimes that's really cool. And then, or maybe you go the next day to the local store to see if they've got it, or there's an in-store and you meet the band. All those things are very tactile. Yeah,
as far as I know, they've never gone away. I'm 51, and it's just been a bit of a worm. So they're having a resurgence right about now with the vinyl, and why not? Sharing music must be something that you really enjoy. Were you like a lad that used to run up to someone in the playground and say, "Have you heard the latest Depeche Mode?" Or have you something like?
Yeah.
Were you that guy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the earliest ones were like, I had friends in elementary school who were, we would identify ourselves as Beatles nuts, and it would be like, I used to write my name. My name's Paul Myers with an M, right? So Paul Myers, I would write Paul M on my Beatle records, which is, Paul McCartney. So I would be like sort of the transmogrified onto the Beatles. They were of me. And then I would buy get Beatle records for Christmas, and I'd get them for my birthday. And I would also give them to people, and I would talk about the Beatles. And then when I was a little older, I would buy singles, 45s, and I would take them to school to show everybody, like, this is Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. It's a song called Ohio. I remember that's how old I am. I remember when that was a new single, and I would show, but I'd also buy Carpenter's records. And I found that's the thing. I also grew up at a time when you could buy like the very singles culture. So you don't have to like one style of music. And, Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin were just as important to me as Crosby, Stills and Nash and some novelty record that I bought that week. So that was kind of neat. And and then as I got older, I was a huge Elvis Costello XTC fan and Joni Mitchell. And I would really go and buy whole catalogs and totally say, have you heard this? Have you heard this? Have you heard Court and Spark by Joni Mitchell? It's great. Judy Sill, like albums that I know maybe some people didn't hear yet. And I'd be like, you got to check this out, So, yeah, I guess I'm a zealot.
Wow. Yes, it's hardly surprising you've had such a fantastic career in music journalism. Then you were definitely an early adopter of sharing music. And let's look for a really good place for everyone to jump into the Record Store Day podcast. Neil Finn, definitely. Yes. He's not an Aussie, but he spent a lot of time over here.
Oh, I know not to do that, by the way. I know not to tell an Australian that I love New Zealand, or the opposite, or maybe it's more the other way around. Actually, you don't tell a Kiwi that actually, I love Australia.
Most people are desensitized because as much as we might rib New Zealand, we love it. They're our allies. We all were in those wars with a face in the mud. I mean, not me personally, but obviously.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, and
but yeah, we had Neil Finn on.
A lot of people like Fred Armisen because he is all over everything, music, and so that would be another good one. I mean, it's hard to go past Tony Visconti for me, but gosh, when I saw Tony Visconti come up there, I thought I couldn't click fast enough. I was fumbling a phone.
Can I just tell you, Tony Visconti, I had got about 6 or 7 people respond to be on the show when I first started it up, and I thought I would just get a bunch of them recorded. Tony was the first guy to respond. Wow. And so he ended up being the first one on the air, and he did it just like you and me on a screen, but the microphone he was using, it was in his vocal studio. And I said, that's a nice microphone. He said, this is the one we used for Black Star and The Next Day by David Bowie. So he was on the same mic that David Bowie sang on, and it just like goosebumps, and he was telling me stories about working on Paul McCartney's Band on the Run, which, I mean, not many people realize that Tony Visconti had a small part in that record because it's generally a Paul McCartney, Jeff Emmerich thing. But but he did some arranging because he's also a great arranger. So just to talk to guys and women who are the people who did the things you like, Lucinda Williams, who's one of my favorite sort of country Americana artists, sitting there talking to her, and she's like saying, I like talking to you. This is really good. And I'm like, you like talking to me? I'm talking to Lucinda Williams, And it's really fun to do that. My favorite thing is when I feel like I ask a question and the person goes, that's a good question, or something like that, because it feels like, okay, I do understand you. So yeah, having Tony Visconti was great. For me, Elvis Costello was great. I'm trying to think now. Well, just also to get to talk to like Susanna Hoffs of the Bangles, or Jane Wiedlin of the Go-Go's, or Jason Isbell, who's a great emerging, well, he's a big artist now, but he's just one of those newer Americana artists. And Jason and Isbell's on my show, and it's just such a great feeling. And the Black Pumas are on my show, and I do call it my show. I mean, I definitely feel like it's
your name on it.
But I write it. I also engineer it. I write the theme music for it. All the electronic instrumentals that are on the show are things I've made here. Sometimes I make them on purpose for a specific episode, and and I record it right here. And it's just it's definitely a handmade show.
Wowie. Stop the presses. This one I've missed. George Thorogood.
Yeah, I mean, that comes up.
What the hell has he been up to?
Well, he's out there being a road. Well, he's being a road warrior, and that's the thing. That's the thing I love too, is like I get somebody who maybe you're not hearing about much lately. And I had listened to those Delaware Destroyer records, the first ones that came out years ago on Rounder Records. And someone said, hey, you can get George Thorogood on the show. And I don't know who else would have said yes immediately, but I did. Because I said, oh, yeah, I want to know what he's like. And of course, these guys they've been at it for so long. They know how to do the interview better than you. So you ask a question, you get like an hour-long answer because they know what to tell you. Of course. And so it's an easiest job in the world with some of these people,
Yeah. Yes. Well, George, I used to. Little story. We had a local TV station, and it was local. And when they had a spare 4 minutes, they would chuck in a video clip. Very nice of them, actually. And George was on regular play there, and they would play a couple of his songs, and that's how I got to know him and love his raw music. Now, a lot of people have said, "Oh, I was always a Sparks fan." I love Sparks, but you, I believe, sir, I reckon you were a Sparks fan.
Oh yeah. So having Sparks on the show, I had talked to them once before for the Todd Rundgren book, because I don't know if you know this, but Todd Rundgren produced the very first Sparks record.
Yeah.
And kind of started their career. And so when Edgar Wright was doing the documentary about the Sparks, it's called The Sparks Brothers, about Sparks, I thought to myself, I've always wanted to get Sparks on the show. And I happened to be talking to Edgar Wright about something else, because I do a lot of other journalism. And I said, when your film comes out, let's get Ron and Russell Mael and Edgar Wright together on a 4-way Zoom. And at the time, Edgar was in London and the Sparks guys were in their homes in Los Angeles. So it was 4 different locations on one Zoom. And it was great. It was just such a great thing to have those guys on the show, and we ended up also repackaging that one on an episode with Questlove, the musician from the Roots, who'd done this film Summer of Soul. So 2 documentaries had just come out that I really loved. And so it was that's, if you look for it, you can get the Sparks interview on 2 different places on our list. And you can also get the Questlove interview in 2 different places, but there's this one that combines them, because sometimes I like repackaging them as themes, like the producers and just the films. And
yeah, that's a fun time.
So it was really fun talking to Sparks, and they were just as you imagine, and I've been a big fan since I saw Wonder Girl. They were performing it on a show called American Bandstand, which I think people know about. It's an American TV show that we got in Canada, where I grew up. I'm from Toronto, Canada. And by the way, that was a huge place for Midnight Oil were huge in Toronto, Canada. I think they were huge everywhere, but also, and we mentioned Neil Finn, Crowded House were huge in Canada before, I think, a lot of places. And who else we got? Well, of course, we got Kylie Minogue in Canada.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
A lot of
stuff travels. Yeah, no, a lot of. Well, she came in through the Stock Aitken Waterman thing, because when she had that Locomotion hit, but then later Can't Get You Out of My Head was a huge international hit.
Oh, yeah.
I digress. What about Sparks? So I was listening to Sparks after seeing them on American Bandstand, and then Tony Visconti actually worked with them a little bit later, and then they did these albums like Indiscreet and Propaganda that were huge for me, and then they went electronic, and they were working with Giorgio Moroder and doing Beat the Clock and all this stuff. And they just kept changing and changing and changing and actually getting smarter and smarter, maybe more niche audience as they go along. But, now there's a point where people are starting to go, oh, Sparks. Yes. They have a connoisseur vibe about them. So it's gratifying.
Hey, I'm honest. I dipped in and out about every 10 or 15 years, but at least I dipped. And I haven't lied to anyone that I was across their content.
I dropped out. I dropped out for a few years too. I don't remember the Want That Sucker era. I went back to later, So yeah, for sure.
So let's congratulate you on 2 seasons of the podcast. Well done. No mean feat. And a 3rd season coming up. Is there anything you want to tease out episodes wise for us?
Well, I mean, in the future.
Yeah.
Currently, I mean, right now, everyone can download. We just did this great episode with the Daptone Records guys, and they, of course, put out the records with Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings. And Sharon Jones is no longer with us, as are a few of their label people like Charles Bradley. And so to have Neil and Gabe from Daptone talking about the 20th anniversary of Daptone Records, I love stuff like that, where we could do a little bit of a deep dive on a specific world and a label. And on that same episode, I talked to a man named Wesley Stace, who some people might know as John Wesley Harding.
Yeah.
And he's got an incredible new album that just is a completely different style change for him. So I was really excited about that. We do have in the can coming up in a couple of weeks. I might be breaking this news now, but Yola is going to be on our show. And I didn't want to announce it until I got the interview done, which I did already. And so that's exciting. And we're working on a couple of other things. And I also have in the distant future, there's an episode with Andy Partridge of XTC where we've already recorded it, but I just want to place it in the running order in a certain place. And for me, that's it was like the conversation was about an hour long, and we just talked about everything. And I could talk to Andy forever. And thankfully, I think we will, because he said he'd come back and do some more. So
how's Andy doing? He's generally.
Oh, he's great. He's great. Yeah. He sometimes overstates his own obscurity, because he'll make a point of, his new record is called My Failed Songwriting Career. But you talk to any musician, even younger musicians than me, and a lot of people are hugely influenced by XTC. They have a very, very good name. They're a source for a lot of people. So anyway, that's all coming up.
High quality XTC, and there's only one XTC.
So that's all coming up in the next little while. But we do it every 2 weeks. You can go to recordstoreday.com to find out more information about Record Store Day. But you can also just look up the Record Store Day podcast with Paul Myers on any of your apps, and follow me on Twitter. You'll find I'm always promoting it. So
hey, follow Paul on Twitter, because that's where I discovered him and have been enjoying him for a really long time.
Thank you so much.
Now, you can become a Knight of the Realm for service to long form interviews. And I hope you do get knighted for that one day, because you're a member of the Commonwealth. But Ken Plume can't. But do you think an exception should be made to Ken Plume for to
Ken?
become? Yeah, I don't know Ken, but I've been following him for many years, and
yeah, I've been on his show. I've been on twice at least on his show.
You've got at least 3 up there.
Yeah.
And he's always
a lot of fun.
He's another long form interviewer that I really enjoy, and just
I like Ken. I like Ken a lot. You know who I also like, if I may, also just want to plug the Soda Jerker guys from Liverpool. They're Soda Jerker on songwriting. It's a little bit different than what I do, but as a songwriter, I really love their stuff. So,
let's look into that.
Yeah,
too.
So say hi to Ken Plume for me, but also say hi to the Soda Jerker boys.
It's hard to get an interview with. You can do an interview with Ken.
Oh, I should just say
maybe it's just me. Now, in your honor, I bought a bit of vinyl. It's an Aussie artist. Now, can this not flare out? Oh, it's
flaring out a lot. Hold on.
That's all right. When I do the video, I will insert it in, Paul. It's Simulation Ride by a lovely female artist called Merpire. And I just wanted to mention that I'll be giving that away, and I'll also send you some Merpire audio so you can check it out and see if it gets your stamp of approval.
I would love that too.
So that'll be another fun thing that'll be coming up. We want to mention Paul's 4 books, Bare Naked Ladies. That's a authorized biography. And that is going to be really interesting. The one that really piqued my interest, but it was $131 on Amazon for some reason, was It Ain't Easy, the Long John Baldry story.
Yeah, I think that's because it's currently I took the rights back from the original publisher, because it had sort of been, I think it was out of print, and I just said, yeah, I'll take it back and we'll put it out again. But it's called It Ain't Easy, Long John Baldry and the Birth of the British Blues. And I got to say, it was a real trip to interview like Elton John and Rod Stewart and Paul McCartney and Mick Fleetwood and all these people who were basically sent along a journey by Long John Baldry. And, he's uncredited by a lot of people, but he's influential, especially in Elton John's life. So that was fun. And yeah.
He pops up all over the place in that those late 60s time of music in the UK. The Todd Rundgren book we've mentioned, and it's going to be really interesting for anyone interested in rock or music. And comedy also is something that you're obviously very interested in, because you did the Kids in the Hall biography, I guess you'd call it. Yeah. What was that like?
Do the Kids in the Hall have any profile in Australia? No. I didn't think so. It's really a North American thing, but I know that some British people they were on Channel 4 in Britain. So I think, but they were mainly on HBO in America and on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in Canada. And they're a great influential comedy troupe. A lot of the people that you like out of America, Canada, and maybe even England would have heard the Kids in the Hall or seen the Kids in the Hall.
Yeah.
They're still together, and they're doing a brand new series for Amazon. So that's cool.
So
And
if you're into comedy podcasts like Comedy Bang Bang, they get mentioned all the time.
yeah,
WTF with Mark Maron, he'll mention that he doesn't understand their comedy all the time. But he does mention them.
Yeah, no, he also, one of the guys' names is Kevin McDonald, and there's a filmmaker named Kevin McDonald, and I think Mark had an interesting thing where he'd booked the wrong Kevin McDonald, and then so he ended up doing both of them. Like he ended up booking two Kevin McDonalds, I think maybe on the same episode. I don't remember, right? It's a long time ago. Yeah, no, and I don't know if there's an NBC show called Superstore that was, I don't know if that exported, but Mark McKinney from The Kids in the Hall was recently in that series, Superstore, which just wrapped. So.
Yeah, Superstore was trending big. So obviously we enjoyed that here. So look, let's say goodbye to Paul Myers. He's got so much to enjoy there on the internet. We've got to get across it. But most importantly, lately is 52 episodes, soon to be 53 of the Record Store Day podcast. Let's go out and grab that and say thank you very much, Mr. Paul Myers.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And so, like I said, neat to be able to talk to Australia from Berkeley, California. Thanks a lot.
It is neat. Yeah, it's a word I love.